Before we start, if you guys enjoy spooky stories about rules, horror, or time travel for the time being, be sure to drop a subscribe if you enjoy this content. Let's get into the story. Entry 215, August 13th, 2021, 5 p.m. The frigid hellscape lay bare yet inescapable as far as the eye could see, in all directions, and was blocked only by the towering rock formations to the south, on which my custom snowmobile had crashed. Miraculously unharmed, I fled the wreckage on foot in the same direction I had been going on the vehicle, which was back to camp, due north and a little bit west from the wreck. This entry takes a drastic turn in the subject and tone of writing in this journal, with my previous entries mostly consisting of nothing more than notes on the mating habits of penguins and other Antarctic birds, as this relates to my 6-person research team's field of study. Currently, I am left alone in the middle of the snowy wasteland after having been caught in a snowstorm while away from our camp. Indeed, the storm blew my snowmobile far off track from where I intended to go, and I since changed direction numerous times on my return trip back to camp. I had attempted to reach my group through the usage of a long-distance communicator, but the device was blown out of my gloved hand by the high winds, thus leaving me without any mode of communication. Most definitely the greatest setback of all was the destruction of my only method of vehicular transport, the snowmobile, thus forcing me to resume my trek on foot. Entry 216, August 13th, 2021, 7:30 p.m. I have now learned, since the recent abating of the storm revealed new rocky protrusions that I would have recognized if they existed anywhere near the camp, and also the fact that on my return trip, I changed directions numerous times and traveled over 3 times the distance that I did on my outbound excursion. I have now learned that I am completely lost in the middle of the Antarctic wasteland. I am left with very few provisions. I expected for this to be a short voyage, and far from enough clothing to survive indefinitely in such frigid temperatures. This document is a scientific journal reserved for scientific research and documentation of my personal actions while conducting said research, and therefore I will not be explicitly clear in my extreme panic when confronted with such a disturbing reality. I will therefore allow you to assume at my overwhelming distress, rather than rant about it in terms that very well might not do my emotions justice. With me, I have a thin sleeping bag, a small foldable tent, which I retrieved from the cargo of the snowmobile after it was wrecked, which I intend to use to make a makeshift structure. Without such a shelter from the elements, even a poor one, I would certainly make this place my grave. Yet about half an hour ago, where I first thought I was going to pitch my tent, I came upon a strange object that previously I had assumed was some sort of short rock formation. Indeed, this was no rock formation. It was a quite average-looking wooden door. The wood is evidently fir from the somewhat grainy texture and was stained a dark brown. It is complete with a frame that was stained a similar color. The doorknob was made of brass. I traced a circle around the wooden thing, and it was clearly not connected to any sort of aperture. It appeared as if someone had just dropped it there in the snow, where it stood erect and straight, as if it was enabled to stand on its own by being fastened to the ground itself. I was going to brush some of the snow collecting around the base aside in order to check how such an object stood on its own. but an indescribable feeling washed over me that cautioned me against doing such an act. Indeed, when I first recognized the door, I was profoundly relieved and comforted by its presence. I suppose the feeling of being accompanied, even by an inanimate object, in the face of such desolation, is rather hard to describe. Certainly, I was relieved at first that I would not have to spend the night feeling as if I was completely alone. However, such feelings have since given way to emotions, such as the one that prevented me from further investigating or opening the curious gate, or even my current holding of dread at the thing, which made me decide to move my tent some 200 feet away from the door. For in spite of my newfound accompaniment, the structure's presence begged the question, how did it end up here? Certainly, I could not answer, and the more I thought about the absurdity of its attendance and its existence, the further my fear of the thing increased, until I could no longer bring myself to think of it, I dare say, as a wholly material object. As I say this, I reflect and see that I am now ranting, perhaps from fatigue or cold. It is time for me to rest. I will resume my entries tomorrow. Entry 217, August 14th, 2021, 11 a.m. Upon waking, a chill ran down my frigid spine as I observed the obviously purposefully placed object in the distance. I stood silhouetted by the morning sun, which wheeled low around the horizon every day and never set, as it was here at the poles. I consumed a small portion of my meager rations and worked up the energy to attempt exercise such that I might keep my body warm, but after a time, my hypothermic limbs could no longer bear the strain of prolonged movement, and I was resigned to conserve my energy in my tent. The walls of the tent were thin enough that even through them I could still observe the ever-watching form of the phantom structure meeting my gaze from its vantage point in the snow. I really wasn't sure what was worse, to rest with it in plain view or to roll around and bear the eerie feeling of leaving myself vulnerable to an object very possibly not of this world. I will follow up this account in my next entry. Now, I must rest. Entry 218, August 14th, 2021, 1 p.m. I am now positively sure that this object must surely have some malevolent purpose. Upon waking from my slumber, I was still able to identify its ominous form standing amidst the silence of the icy plains, beckoning with some unnatural medium that I travel through it to observe the unknown evil waiting on the other side. No, I will resist its pull. Oh God, what is this blasphemous thing, and what on earth did this wretch do to deserve such a horrible fate? For the door is now oscillating and stretching in my view, expanding to great heights and lengths and drawing ever nearer my tent as it does so. It is changing its color to many uncanny and indescribable hues, and before I can begin to register one in my mind, it rapidly switches to another, even more disturbing shade. Always it calls to me, speaking in tongues, beckoning that I may come and reveal the hellish secrets locked behind its deceivingly simple wooden paneling. Over 200 feet of snow separated me from the door yesterday. Now the warping abomination lay not only 2 meters from the opening flap of my tent. The knob can now be seen, clearly twisting and warping in its dimensions, but it cannot open on its own. The voice assures me my suffering will end when I open the door. Entry 219, August 14th, 2021, 1:20 p.m. There is beyond our world a gulf of light upon which rests the Nameless on his throne of stars. Soon he will bring upon the earth a veil of night, shadowing all under his grasp of darkness. I know, indeed, for I have opened the door, and it revealed to me the apocalypse doomed to come. The veil, it creeps outward from the door, melting the snow and scalding the earth, demonstrating that the voice's words to me were indeed true. For he, I am sure, it was indeed he who spoke. He said that what I saw through that wondrous wooden door was no vision or glimpse, but it was indeed a gate through time to a future where he and his minions had raised mankind's great cities and established a brand new world far greater than any that has been before. I know this not just from such a ring of melting ice, but also from the dark silhouette stooping over to pass through the gate. I wept as he opened the flap to my tent, and his voice, before only a primordial whisper coming from the door, his voice loudened into a beautiful scream that spoke all the secrets of the new earth to come. I wept as it stroked my dying body with its fingers, black as night, yet bright as the stars. It watches me write these words while I drift off into eternal slumber from the cold and hunger, and I pray only that my team may find this journal and spread the beautiful words that we are indeed not alone in the universe. This was the journal of one Stephen Johannesburg, who left our research base on the 13th to track down a penguin family that had been spotted on one of our cameras. He told us via his communicator that he never found the penguins, and around the same time we lost contact with him after a violent snowstorm. Afterwards, we were still unable to contact Stephen via the transponder. Our team assumed the worst and began a search via helicopter. We didn't find him until 3 p.m. on the 14th. His mangled body was found gored on a rock outcropping, on which his snowmobile had been wrecked. There was no doubt that his body had been destroyed immediately on impact, and the layer of snow covering his coat alongside the qualities of the body proved that he had died during the snowstorm on the 13th. We buried Stephen in the snow next to where the crash had occurred. A search of the contents of the snowmobile's cargo and Johannesburg's body showed that the tent and the sleeping bag belonged to Stephen were missing, and these items could not be found for another hour until we eventually located his tent in the middle of a flat, glaciated outcropping. Inside, we found the missing and rather peculiarly warm sleeping bag. Perhaps even stranger was the presence of a rather battered-looking wooden door laying flat in the snow a few feet from the tent. Despite its eeriness, the door was rather standard in appearance, and nothing out of the ordinary happened when it was opened or shut. It wasn't until we began to tear down and repack his makeshift camp that we found Stephen's research journal inside of his sleeping bag, along with the pencil he has used to write in it. The 3 most recent entries are listed in the story we just heard, and were extremely haunting and verging on the paranormal. The dates listed are more recent than the 13th of August, when Stephen was supposed to have died, but Johannesburg had a very unique and unmistakable style of handwriting, and the likes of the 3 most recent entries were no exception. Even though Stephen had no previous history of mental decay, it is apparent, especially in the final entry to the journal, that Johannesburg has lost his wits and had gone insane. But this offers no answer to the quite unexplainable presence of the tent, or the ominous dating of the notebook drafts, nor does it offer any clues as to the eerie presence of the obscure wooden door. In spite of all of this, I think the 2 things that are truly forced my hand in publicizing this document were the large ring of melted snow extending out from the door on the ground, and the existence of a disturbingly relevant handprint, far larger and with longer digits than a normal human's, on the dusting of snow covering the tent flap.